Imagine this. One moment, just a split-second choice on a battlefield that could have completely changed, well, everything we know about modern history. Today, we're diving into one of history's most fascinating and definitely most debated what-if stories. It's about this alleged encounter between a British soldier, Henry Tandey, and, believe it or not, a young Adolf Hitler during World War I.
Yeah, and you have to picture the scene, right? World War I, just chaos and desperation. Soldiers were facing these impossible moral choices constantly. So this deep dive, it's not just did they meet, it's really about exploring how one act of mercy or, the lack of one could echo down through history. Our job here is to kind of unpack this whole gripping story. Look at the claims, the doubts, the really big questions it brings up.
And we're using an article to help us navigate this called The Soldier Who Spared Hitler, The Missed Shot That Could Have Changed History. It's by Aaron Rodney, from History in 5 Minutes or Less. And honestly, it's full of these details that really make you stop and think. We're aiming to give you the essence of it, the key takeaways, so you really get a feel for this pivotal, though, yeah, definitely debated moment. Get ready, because this one might just shift how you think about certain moments in history. Okay, so let's set the scene. It's autumn 1918. World War I is finally brutally grinding towards an end. The German army is retreating. They're battered, basically broken in places. And the British and French are pushing hard on the Western Front. And right in the middle of all that, near a French village called Marcoing, you've got this British soldier, Henry Tandey.
Right. And Tandy, he wasn't just, any soldier. He was in the Duke of Wellington's regiment, which was pretty elite, a total veteran. He'd been through hell already, Ypres at the Somme, Passchendaele, some of the worst fighting. In fact, he ended up being one of Britain's most decorated privates. Victoria Cross, Distinguished Conduct Medal, Military Medal. I mean, this guy was tough. He'd seen it all, survived it all. So his actions come from that perspective, a seasoned warrior.
Exactly. And it's in that context, this horrible backdrop, that this supposed moment happens. The British had pushed the Germans back, the shooting starts to die down a bit, and then this wounded German soldier, just limping, totally unarmed, stumbles right into Tandey's line of fire. The article describes him as young, maybe with that sort of distinctive thin mustache, piercing eyes, just looked completely defeated, barely standing, utterly vulnerable.
And Tandy, being a soldier, raises his rifle, finger on the trigger. I mean, he had every reason, every right to shoot. This was the enemy. Millions had died. Mercy wasn't exactly standard operating procedure, but something stopped him. Maybe just the sheer exhaustion of it all, or seeing how hopeless this guy looked, who knows? But in that split second, maybe battlefield compassion, maybe something else, he lowered his rifle, and the German soldier apparently just nodded like a silent thank you and then limped off, vanishing back into the fog of war, carrying, unknowingly, a future that would just define the next century.
And that soldier, if the story is accurate, was Adolf Hitler. It really does give you chills, doesn't it? Thinking how that tiny act of mercy could have had these absolutely massive consequences. But how did this even come out? When did anyone, Tandey included, first hear about this potential connection?
Well, it wasn't immediate. It actually surfaced quite dramatically about 20 years later. September 1938. Think about the timing. The world is on edge. Another war is looming. Hitler is meeting Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, in Munich. This is during those really tense talks for the Munich Agreement, the attempt to appease Hitler over Czechoslovakia. And it's in that super high-stakes meeting that the story apparently gets told.
Right, the Munich Agreement. So in the middle of all that tension, Hitler points to a painting in his office, a World War I scene. The Men in Crossroads, it was called, by Fortunino Matania. Shows British soldiers helping the wounded from Tandey's regiment. And then he tells Chamberlain this incredible story linking him to that painting.
Exactly. And what's really striking is how he supposedly told it. He apparently recognized one of the soldiers in the painting as Henry Tandey, the guy Hitler claimed who spared his life back in 1918. Hitler apparently said he was wounded, retreating near Marcoing. Tandey had him dead to rights but chose not to shoot. Something like, "He nearly killed me," Hitler supposedly told Chamberlain, "but took pity on me. I will never forget that soldier." It suggests, it had this deep personal meaning for Hitler. Maybe he saw it as proof of his destiny, his protected status.
The article also mentions another detail, that Hitler supposedly kept a photograph of Henry Tandey in uniform. Some versions say he'd show it around, telling people how this British soldier spared to the future Führer. If that part's true, what does that tell us about Hitler's psychology, maybe how he used this story?
Well, it tells you a lot about how important personal narrative was, especially for someone like Hitler, who was, let's face it, carefully building his own myth. Whether the photo thing is absolutely proven or not, the story itself definitely got out there. Chamberlain brought it back to Britain, people talked about it, and it kind of added to this idea of Hitler being almost fated to rise,
Yeah.
miraculously saved. It's a perfect example of how an anecdote, true or not, can just take off and shape how people see things. It wasn't just a casual memory, it became part of the Hitler mythos.
Okay, but Hitler's side, however dramatic, is only half of it. What about Tandey? Henry Tandey himself. By all accounts, he wasn't someone looking for the spotlight, right? Quiet guy, didn't talk much about the war. But once Hitler's claim got out in '38, people must have wanted to know what he thought.
Oh, absolutely. And Tandy did acknowledge, yes, he had spared wounded or surrendering Germans during the war, which, maybe surprisingly to us now, wasn't entirely unheard of. Little moments of humanity even in that horror. He specifically recalled an incident around September 1918 during that Battle of Marcoing. His regiment pushed the Germans back. He described seeing a wounded German stumbling away, helpless. And Tandy apparently said later something like, "I took aim but couldn't shoot a wounded man, so I let him go." He remembered the act of mercy. But he couldn't, at that time anyway, connect it specifically to Hitler.
Wow, that decision. It just carries so much weight looking back, seeing a person, not just a uniform. But when he eventually heard that the man might have been Hitler, how did he react to that possibility, that horrifying thought?
Yeah, the reaction described in the article is pretty much profound shock. Horror, really. He couldn't definitively know, obviously. But just the idea that his act of compassion might have let, one of history's greatest monsters survive, it really shook him. Tandy is quoted as saying something like, "If only I had known what he would become, I would have shot him." Which just perfectly captures that awful, backward-looking ethical bind he was in, grappling with the totally unintended consequences of kindness.
And as World War II started, and everyone saw what Hitler was doing, that story must have just hung over him. The weight of thinking his mercy might have cost millions of lives.
Yeah.
That's heavy.
Extremely heavy. Some reports suggest he struggled with guilt, others that he kind of tried to push the story away, maybe dismiss it as just talk. Who could bear that burden?
He lived quietly after the war, worked in a factory. But you imagine that what if never truly left him.
And despite all the public fascination and historians digging into it, Tandy himself never seemed to make a huge definitive claim either way. He stuck to his story. He spared men, yes. Was one of them Hitler? He couldn't know for sure, couldn't confirm it. When he died in 1977, aged 86, despite being a Victoria Cross recipient, a genuine war hero, history often remembers him most for the shot he didn't take.
Okay, so Hitler tells this dramatic story. Tandy has his own fragmented, horrified recollection. But historians are pretty skeptical, right? What are their main issues with the story? Where does it fall apart?
Well, there are a few big reasons for the skepticism. First off, just the basic fact, the records. While Tandy's regiment was fighting near Marcoing in September 1918, pinning down Hitler's exact location at that specific time is really difficult. The records just don't definitively place him there then. That kind of geographical time mismatch is a major red flag for historians trying to verify things.
So if the records don't line up, how much does that damage the story? Could it just be a gap in the records, or is it more fundamental?
It feels pretty fundamental because it makes proving it independently almost impossible. Plus, you have to consider Hitler himself. He was a master mythmaker, especially about his own past. He loved telling stories that made him seem destined, miraculously saved, guided by providence. He knew the power of a good origin story. So historians strongly suspect he might have just made it up, or at least massively embellished it, for propaganda purposes, to boost his own legend. It served him.
Right. And what about the painting? The Men in Crossroads, the one Hitler supposedly recognized Tandy in.
Yeah, that's another key point. That specific painting, The Men in Crossroads, it wasn't actually depicting the battle near Marcoing where the encounter supposedly happened. It showed an earlier battle at a different place.
Oh.
So it's much more likely Hitler saw the painting, recognized the uniform of the regiment, maybe the general scene, and just sort of slotted it into his pre-existing story about being spared. It looks more like finding evidence to fit the story he already wanted to tell, rather than the painting being the actual trigger for the memory.
Okay. So, inconsistent records. Hitler's tendency to, let's say, enhance his biography, the painting not quite fitting. It definitely makes you lean towards this being more of a useful story for Hitler than historical facts.
It really forces you, doesn't it, to be critical about where historical stories come from, especially when they originate with figures who have, very clear agendas, how easily these narratives can take root, even without solid proof. That's a big lesson here. You have to ask why a story is being told, not just what the story is.
Which leads us inevitably to that massive, haunting what if. It's almost impossible not to wonder.
Yeah.
What if Tandey had pulled the trigger? The mind just spins, thinking about the consequences.
Oh, absolutely. The immediate thought is staggering, isn't it? No Hitler, likely no Nazi party rising the way it did, maybe no World War II as we experienced it, no Holocaust, millions upon millions of lives potentially saved. It's just an overwhelming thought experiment. It really highlights how one person's action or inaction could potentially alter the entire global trajectory.
But is history ever that simple? Just one bullet changing everything? Or were the conditions in Germany then, the anger, the economy, the nationalism, were they so strong that someone like Hitler, or maybe even worse, would have emerged anyway?
That's the crucial counter question, isn't it? History is rarely, if ever, down to just one person or one event. The factors that allowed Hitler to rise were incredibly complex and deep-seated in Germany at the time. Post-war collapse, the Treaty of Versailles resentment, hyperinflation, social chaos. The appeal of extreme ideas was potent. So yeah, if Hitler had died in 1918, would someone else have stepped into that vacuum? Could another demagogue have harnessed that same anger? It's impossible to know, but it forces you to think about the bigger forces, the societal currents, not just the individual figureheads.
So wrapping this up,
Yeah.
whether you see it as fact or fiction or something in between, the story of Henry Tandey and the wounded soldier really makes you grapple with the weight of individual choices. You got Hitler's dramatic claim, Tandey's sort of hazy memory mixed with that awful guilt, and then the historian saying, hang on a minute.
Exactly. And maybe the most fascinating thing isn't just the what if, but the how. How an anecdote, maybe even a fabricated one, can become so powerful. How it can shape a leader's image, feed into ideas of destiny. It's a real challenge to us to think critically, right? To look past the headline story and ask about the source, the motive, how history gets remembered and retold. It really brings home the human side of these huge historical events, even with all the uncertainty.
It absolutely highlights how choices, even small ones, can send ripples out that we can't even imagine. Henry Tandey, decorated war hero, yet he's often remembered most for that one shot he didn't take. That single moment, real or maybe not, kind of defines his legacy for many people.
And it leaves us with a pretty profound question to chew on, doesn't it? In our own lives, shaped by countless little decisions every day, how often do we stop to think about the possible ripple effects? Those small acts of mercy we might show or judgments we might make. How could they, without us ever knowing, be steering things for someone else or even for ourselves down the line?
That is definitely something to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into one of history's most compelling what-ifs. We really hope it's given you some food for thought on a story that continues to fascinate and provoke,